All right, fam. The Toronto man's word of the week is tick up, meaning curvy, sweet. You know, tick up, yeah, that. Synth.
That's it. That's it. Look.
What's up, fam? It's your boy Demuir here, purveyor of all sounds underground. Thank you for joining me on my YouTube channel today, where I'll be discussing the topic of annoying frequencies I typically come across and how I go about dealing with them. But before I jump into the details of this one, what I need from you is that SLC. Hit subscribe, like, comment, and more importantly, hit the notifications bell to stay in touch with the new videos that we have up and coming. Okay, I'm not sure when this will go live, this particular video, because Juan likes to play God and put things out of order because he's waste. Anyway, so that being said, if you happen to catch my video on mixing tips from my mastering engineers, you will know that one of the things they spoke about was like frequency collisions and, you know, muddiness and overcompression and limiters. So what I'm going to talk about is how to deal with the annoying frequency pieces we typically come across in electronic music. It's unheard of that someone gets it right all the time and their mixes are just perfect. Like everyone from the newbie to the person that is at a mastery level of this stuff, there's always something that we hear or we think we can tweak or do better. So the purpose of this video is just to show you how I deal with the opportunities presented by these annoying frequencies and how you can incorporate them into your workflow easily. I will say that I do rely heavily on a tool called Melta, and it's this guy right here. And I tend not to use it a lot, but when I do, I lean on it pretty heavy because it gives me a nice visual representation of what's going on. I mean, you can get away with not having to use a tool like this and pull up your EQs and make sure you're showing, you know, what's happening with the frequency curve post, you know, processing or pre, depending on how you want to tackle the issues. But I think this is a good way to just show all of the sounds across the frequency spectrum and how they are interacting with one another and allowing you to make the best mixing decisions in that moment and to also validate what is happening exactly. All right, so let's jump into things. Point number one is low end collisions. So it typically deals with anything between 20 and I would say just above 200 hertz, you know, so we're talking about things like the kick, which is this piece here. I know what it is right there. And then the bass, and as well as vocals. As you can see in this example, it's the high and live dirty God Speaks edit. This is just a spin-off that I did of the song after playing at House of Yes, and I was inspired to do this edit, so it's not out. But you know, things came together nicely, and I know with the vocal, based on how the singer was doing things, it hits in that same area. You know, in this case, it's between 50 hertz all the way up to 2000 hertz, and depending on, you know, where I was filtering it in the track, it can open right up into, you know, the 8000 hertz area. So that being said, you have a lot of low end frequency collision here. And this piece is the synth bass as well. That is going right up into the 500 hertz area. And I think there's another piece missing. Oh, that's not the synth bass. This is actually the Fender Rhodes. And I'm glad I paused this where I did because I think a lot of people misconstrue the Fender Rhodes just to be some regular keyboard. It actually has a lot of bass harmonics depending on what notes you're hitting and what key you're in. So something to look out for. But all of these contribute to low end collision. The beauty of this picture is that it follows my ethos of everything needing to have a place in the frequency spectrum when it comes to the mix, so to speak. So, as I look at this and I'm able to point out things, this is a good result. And I know things are happening pretty much in milliseconds, nanoseconds, so quickly. So if I'm able to distinguish, here's the kick and here is my bass frequency, and I could see what it's doing. Like, why don't we just give this a listen? Pause it. So yeah, you could see that I could see the kick is ducking the bass. I also have a solo going on in here. Why don't we isolate that? I think that is the matrix group. Yeah, it's the purple line. And you can see it's standing out, even though it's colliding on occasion with the filtered vocal, which is the yellow line here. It has its place. It's predominantly in the upper part of the frequency spectrum and not muddying what's going on down here, which is what you want. When it comes to the bass, let's hone in on those pieces here. Let's do bass, the kick, and the vocal as we see it here. So, I need to take out my lead snare. And I'm going to pause this. Perfect spot to pause it. So, as you can see here, this is the synth bass. I usually color my bass as black, just as part of my workflow, so I know exactly what's going on. And you can see here's the kick. So for like a moment it collides, but because I know I'm ducking the bass based on the side chain of this kick break, I know things are sitting in a nice place. And then the vocal is doing what it's doing. As I said, this is an open part of the filter, I'm pretty sure. So you could see here that it's all come up here into this part of the frequency spectrum, but it's not muddy. This stuff is just lasting for milliseconds here, and it validates what I wanted to do in terms of the mixdown and everything having its place. But this is a typical area that causes problems if you're not careful. So, keep that all in mind. Vocals, Fender Rhodes, bass notes, as well as regular bass lines, synth bass lines, and vocals that have low harmonics in there are things to watch out for. And here we have it. So it sounds nice and everything is within its place. Okay, point number 2. This is not too much of an issue that I run across because it's quite easy to identify, but let's do it here. I'm talking about the mid frequency spectrum. Not too much muddying occurs there because it's usually quite manageable, in my opinion. What you're going to come into when you're dealing with the mid frequency in terms of clearing it up and making sure everything has its place is the vocal, which can go pretty much anywhere above and beyond these bass notes here. So we're talking like, we're into like the 300 area right up into 10K. Possibly, especially for female vocals. If it's male vocals, it'll come down a bit lower. But again, depending on what you sampled or what you're dealing with, the harmonics in that vocal could take you down, like in this case, as low as 50 hertz. So generally, it's right across the spectrum, but most of the time it tends to be in the middle of things. Like, we're talking, as I said, anywhere just above 200 hertz into 5,000, 7,000 hertz for the vocal, and keys as well. So let's take a listen. And I'm also going to solo them out here just so it aligns. So let's have a listen. Yeah, so you can see this. I'm going to pause it right there. You can see the Fender Rhodes. This is some of the bass activity I was talking about in the harmonics, but it lasts very briefly, and I think I Yeah, I did put a side chain on it just to make sure it doesn't stick around too long. And you can see the vocal is just taking over everything. So things have a place here, and I'm pretty sure the way I EQ'd the vocal, I put a little dip in the mid-range between 2 and 1,000 hertz. Just a small dip between 1 and 2 dB. And I did that intentionally to ensure the Fender Rhodes chords could be heard. And the other thing was to make space for my lead snare. So let's play that. And I'll also show it in the Melta tool here. So this is the lead snare, that green line there. So let's see how it plays out. Trying to pause it in a nice spot. There we go. So you can see the lead snare also has its place, and it pops all the time because it has a position in the upper part of the frequency spectrum. We'll stop that. So, you know, again, it's just about carving things out, and in mid-range it's not too difficult to deal with. Even when I put the solo from the Matrix Brute here, if we play that, it's the purple line. You could see it just bouncing around with brief collisions happening in the vocal and the snare as well, and the Fender Rhodes. But because it has so much presence in the upper range, your ear can still distinguish it without any real challenge. So, you know, the mid-range is not too difficult to deal with, but making those little cuts to make room for the other instruments, like I did with the vocal, because it occupies such a larger space in the frequency spectrum, and as well as just the fact that I knew I was filtering it up and down, so at any given point in time it might not occupy the mid-range as much as the other instruments would need. Taking a dip in the vocal worked out well in this case. Alright, so point number 3, and there's no real way to demonstrate this other than just to say, just watch out that you don't have too many high frequencies going on in your mix. I guess I can show a little bit here. So what I think I'll do is I'll solo out any beat breaks I have here just to demonstrate the point. I'll leave the lead snare and the Fender Rhodes in. So here's the beat break. No synth. Actually, I don't have those beat breaks in there, but from a listening perspective, you'll catch what I'm saying. So you can hear, like, there's nothing too crazy going on, because I know in this body break where the kick is, and maybe what I'll do is I'll leave the snare with that, and there's the vocal. So the kick is part of a beat break, and it's sitting sweet between, looks like 60 to just a little over 100 hertz when it knocks, and it's ducking any bass or anything else that's colliding with it, with the exception of the vocal. And then the lead snare has its own place here, as you can see. It's not even touching the lower frequency, the lower parts of the frequency. And in the upper end, I just let that beat break ride, because I could see all of the high frequency information here. So I know when you look at that and you just say, geez, man, it's a lot of high frequency activity there to begin with, just within that one beat break. There wasn't much for me to do in terms of the drum programming, and I could see it here. Like, I didn't even bother adding an open hat to the mix because it just wasn't necessary. I could see and hear with the beat break that I sampled, it was just perfect for what was going on in relation to the other instruments in the mix. So watching those high frequencies, making sure you don't have too much going on, is really the trick there. and is quite manageable, in my opinion, much more manageable than the lower frequencies. I had a mastering engineer recently tell me that if you can make a clear distinction between your kick, your snare, and your clap, you're good. Everything else will fall into play, provided you're not overdoing it in certain portions of the frequency spectrum. All right, so point number 4, let's talk about the solutions. So as you see here, my main solution is between, in terms of my ears and what I'm hearing, and as well as the Melta tool, and I highly recommend grabbing this. But like I said, you can open up different instances of EQ. Like we'll open up this piece, my Matrix Brute, along with the Fender Rhodes, and you can play those and just see what the curves are doing and sort of line them up and make certain mixing decisions. But I prefer Melta over these, like I was saying earlier in the video, just because you can color the instances. You can also see from a loudness perspective what they're doing across the board. And you can pause it. You can see where do you need to make changes at certain parts in the song arrangement. So this solution just makes sense for me. But you can do that. Stack your EQs and just see how they're hitting against the frequency spectrum, against one another. And in some cases, go surgical by using dynamic EQing to take out any annoying parts of the frequency in a sound, just to give the other instruments room and space. And point number 5 is, your monitoring situation. You cannot mix what you can't hear. And this will be an ongoing thing. And, I highly recommend you always challenge yourself to make sure you're doing the most to get the most out of your mixes. Even just, a couple of days ago, I was talking to one of my mastering engineers about where I should have the crossover set on my sub, and I might actually change it to be around the range where he recommended, which was super low, like in around the 50 hertz range. But these are ongoing things, if you're looking forward towards continuous improvement of your mixes, especially when you have the mindset like I do, which is to make sure that everything is sitting in its particular place. At least that's my approach for mix downs, because I think the more you can get those segments clear, the better your record will sound and stand the test of time pretty much forever. And if you listen to older records that didn't have all of these plugins and all this other technology that we have today, they stand the test of time. They sound great, and you could still play those records out everywhere. Even though they're not as loud as the music we have today, they still sound great. And there you have it. Those are my thoughts on annoying frequencies and how I deal with them. Let me know your thoughts on this one by commenting below. I usually join the conversation within 48 hours of posting these videos, so I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. Much respect to you. Peace.